This week on the Stereo Image, we're blessed, lucky enough to have perhaps the finest First Amendment attorney in the world, certainly in the United States. Um,
Papa
and
Shaw.
and this is a guy that when you're talking jazz, you really need a First Amendment attorney. But always comes in handy. Anyways, the esteemed Robert Corn-Revere Esquire. See, I even know that legal term, Esquire.
There you go. And you promised me we weren't gonna talk legalese.
We're not. We're not. That's what I said, when I came up with the idea for one of the ideas was have people that are well known for other things and not even mention it. But I've learned that over the course of doing close to 50 of these things now, people want to hear about what you really do as well. I mean, the idea of getting from The Simpsons, David Silverman to not talk about The Simpsons and only talk about playing the tuba was great in my mind, but it doesn't make for compelling
Yeah,
podcast
and makes
listening.
for a short conversation.
Yes, exactly. So in that vein, let's talk first about what kind of music you like to listen to right now.
Boy, a little bit of everything. Recently, I know it's not a new discovery for anyone else, but, for me, I've been listening to the Dead South, which is really a a terrific sort of
Huh?
alt folk band. Their probably signature song is "In Hell I'll Be in Good Company."
Uh-huh.
And, saw Robert Plant, in Nashville about a month ago, which was really
Wow. Was it
fantastic.
with Alison Krauss or was it
No,
just him?
no, but, had, another local group, backing him, and it was fascinating and,
Wow.
inspiring to see someone of a certain age still,
Right, right,
carrying
right.
on and work. Really, really terrific.
It is insane. If one of the great things about being a musician is if they don't kill themselves with drugs or car accidents,
Yeah,
you know,
or a plane crash.
well, yeah, plane crash always, yeah, yeah, Leonard Skinner, and Richie Valens, but and sadly, helicopter crash with Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Yeah,
But you know, I know so many musicians that are flourishing in their 80s. You know,
yeah,
I mean, well, look at Bob Dylan. Some of his best work in the last 10 years, and and of course, Tony Bennett. I saw him when he was 91.
yeah.
Was absolutely in top form, and, you're a couple years older than me, but, we got 20, 30 years left is the way I look at it.
Yeah. Well, also, I grew up, and to a certain extent, you too, grew up in the classic rock generation.
Mhm.
And so I came of age in the 60s, and then I was in college in the 70s. And so it was a terrific time for music.
Right.
But also, my background had been I had been in a high school band and had really appreciated classical music and symphonic music.
Mhm.
And so it was really interesting to see what had been picked up from classical music and some of the classic rock songs and all of that. Um, I didn't come though to appreciate other forms like country music, which I even though I came from sort of a rural area, it was not my thing, and I
Right.
only came to appreciate certain country groups and forms later on. Um, and I didn't really come to jazz until after college,
Mhm.
and then came to appreciate Dave Brubeck, and from that, other jazz greats. And so, when you ask me what kind of music I like, it's really hard to answer that question because I really do like uh, all kinds. And one of the great experiences I had was down in New Orleans seeing Charles Neville on stage,
Wow.
and he was like the coolest human on the planet. Just watching him
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
perform, it was really something.
Well, l you're in that sweet spot, because I was born in '62, so Woodstock, I was 7, you know?
Yeah.
But, I always envy the guys that were like, 15, 16, 17 when Woodstock was happening because they were much more tuned into what was going on at that point, but touched on the high school band, what instrument were you, playing in there?
I played tuba.
You're the 2nd tuba 3rd tuba player I've met, and I think, 2nd tuba player on the show because of
Well,
David
there you go.
Silverman.
You've got a trend going.
I do. Well, there's a lot of low end in this show. And, did you keep up with it at all afterwards?
I didn't. My older brother, Steve, though, did. He plays
Uh-huh.
French horn, and, he was in the University of Illinois marching band and
Mhm.
goes back every year still for the, homecoming reunions, marches, in the, halftime show at homecoming, and he keeps up with a community band out in Montana that he's a part of. I envy him that a bit just because it would have been really terrific fun to keep up with it.
Right.
I moved on to, um, debate
Right.
and and and, that became my primary activity in college and grad school.
Well, you talked a little bit about knowing classical music from playing in the band, and did that lead you into, like, progressive rock stuff like Yes and Emerson,
Absolutely,
Lake and Palmer and that kinda stuff?
absolutely, you know, in high school, discovered Yes, and then the albums of Rick Wakeman when he would do things like Journey to the Center of the Earth and
Sure, sure,
things
sure.
like that, and so that was really just terrific, classic rock bands like Deep Purple, who had such
Right,
a heavy, classical music influence. It was
right.
really, like I say, it was a terrific time for music.
It really was, as evidenced by there's kids in 8th grade still listening to that stuff now,
Yeah. Well, and
60
that's the
years
thing.
later.
I went back home to my hometown or the town where I went to college in, East Central Illinois, went back to my favorite bar, and what was really and this was just last summer, and what was really astonishing to me is that in this bar, they were using essentially the same playlist from when I'd been there in college. I mean, the music from that time has endured, and it wasn't like this was a they were doing a nostalgia gig. It just happened
No,
to be the music that was still something they thought their clientele would relate to.
no, that's I mean, you know, I played in a wedding band in 1976 and '77, and the playlist that we used for that wedding band of Proud Mary and all that kind of stuff, you'd see stuff in the '80s and '90s, and they're still playing those same songs, you know?
Absolutely.
And, for me, listening to AC/DC or Led Zeppelin or Deep Purple or any of the bands that I loved growing up, um, there's a musicality to them that sort of
There
got
is.
stripped away after when you go through punk and then you go through all the rap stuff. I mean, one of the things when I first met Penn, he hated Steely Dan because he only listened to the lyrics. He
Right,
he
right,
thought
right,
it was
and
pretentious, bullshitty William Burroughs references and hi and he just thought it was the most disgusting, horrific display of excess. And I was trying to get him as a budding jazz bass player to say, "No, no, 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 no. They're not playing 1-6-2-5 here. They're not playing the same chord changes as Blue Moon. They're playing hip, cool jazz altered chords, and they're making melodic stuff that's snappy enough to go on the radio, but the Rob Mounsey arrangements and and all the and I'm trying to and he's like, "Yeah, yeah, 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 William Burroughs." And
yeah, but
and
the stuff
so
that was being made back then, it's not the kind of stuff that's gonna be created by AI. It had such a human, soulful element.
other thing is you take a horrific, horrific song that makes your skin crawl, like "You Light Up My Life," and you take that song and you realize that there's 40 musicians on that track. There's an complete string section of people of, studio guys reading music, and there's an arrangement, and there's a big band, and there's a rhythm section. All of that's gone now. It's a guy at his Pro Tools or at his, garage band, and he's laying down his tracks and his beats, and, it's tough for guys that studied music their whole life to get behind that.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
it's a very different world, and the idea that you're paying someone to listen to their record collection. Every time you hire a DJ, you're just paying for some guy to come and play his records for you, in my
Yep,
mind? And
yeah.
I know that there's psychological things and there's other things about it, but it doesn't make any less insulting for someone who spent an entire lifetime practicing an instrument to then go and watch a guy make $50,000 for hitting play on his iPad,
And that's
you know?
so absolutely true at every level of the experience. I was watching a, YouTube bit with, Rick Beato
He's
sometime,
great.
in the last couple of weeks, where he was talking about
Mhm,
from that period, people had more there was more of a personal investment in music,
mhm.
not just from the artist's perspective, but from the consumer's perspective. Because if you're some guy who just been out, mowing lawns for the summer to earn a few bucks, you went down and laid $8 down for an album, and you sat there and you went through the songs one by one and all of that. And it's not like paying $8 for a streaming subscription where you have
Right,
everything available and you'll sample something for 15 seconds and then move on to the next. I mean,
right.
just the investment of your time, your energy in consuming the music was such a
Mhm.
different experience then. And I know it's just it
No, it's I mean, it's true. We all did that exact same thing. You went to the record store and you found a record that you wanted to hear and you read the liner notes and you took it home and you played it over and over till you knew every
you played
track.
it so it was
And
smooth. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and now it's there's not even the idea of listening to a whole record is beyond people's
right. And
mind.
it
You know what I
is
mean?
the idea of it being more of a disposable commodity than an art form.
Right, right, which makes me feel great. Um, it's like when I used to say when people would say, "Oh, I put your records on while we're eating." I'm like, "Oh, thanks. That's only my life's work."
Yeah,
Background
I
music
hope
was
it
what
helps
I
with your
attribute,
digit.
but I'm bitching a lot today, and I'm just joking. But everything is certainly different than, those years of when a band came out, you waited for that next record. You're like,
Absolutely.
I hear Pink Floyd's doing another record.
Yep,
Rumor is that they're gonna make
yep.
and of course, there was no
And then
internet,
you'd
and there
take
was
it
no way
home
to
and play
know.
play the album through, and then you'd
Yeah,
replay either the entire album or particular songs that you liked,
right.
and
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But
yeah.
you did all that same stuff, and then you realized after your tuba experience that, that's not where the real money is, that's
Well,
not
I
where the
didn't see a
future
future
is.
for myself in the tuba world,
Uh-huh.
so, uh,
Well, not
moved on
many
to other
do.
things.
So then you went to the debate club and,
Well, I had done that in high school. I'd done that along with high school band, and it was sort of a toss-up for which was my primary extracurricular activity. Well, all of my curricular activities took precedence over, like, school. Right. The whole point of going to high school was for the activities, whether it was band or drama or debate, and that's really what kept me interested, and then continued that in college, where I went to college on a debate scholarship.
and where was that? Because I thought you went to, like, UMass Amherst.
Eastern Illinois University was the small state school that was 10 miles from the town where I grew up, and so my debate partner at the time got an offer to go there as a team, and we went there, and he decided to do other things after his 2 years, and
Mhm.
I continued with the debate program. Actually, I was not in a rush to get through college. I squeezed 4 years into 5,
Okay, yep, that's a good plan.
but went from there to, graduate school because I'd been offered a debate assistantship, a graduate fellowship to help coach the debate team there, and
Where was
because
that?
this was at University of Massachusetts.
Okay, okay.
Because part of my goal was to extend adolescence beyond any previously known limits, I thought, "Yeah,
Right.
let's stay in school
Well
for a while."
well, and UMass Amherst in
Yes.
in my day was known as a school to, have a good time at.
I'm trying to find a more polite way of putting this, but it was a good school to unwind at.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The pressures of day class, attending didn't really enter into it.
Not so much, and again, I was still immersed in the activities, that is, I was helping with the debate team and going to debate tournaments and things like that, and so but I figured, "Okay, maybe it's time to start thinking about school a little bit more," so I started taking it a little bit more seriously so that when I finally went to law school, I would be actually in the mindset to really focus on the
Right.
school.
Wow, and your love for debate was building arguments and all that was that did you just naturally lean towards law school, or was that something that was starting to really interest you?
Well, it was sort of a natural progression. I
Mhm,
mean, well, as I say, I've been doing debate ever since I was in high school,
mhm.
but also I just loved language. I loved words. And so when I was in undergraduate school, I got a job as a reporter and was working on local newspaper and doing a little bit of all the beats. And as you do in a small town, I covered the city council and the county board, wrote obituaries, did
Oh,
feature stories. Well, it's one of those things where you're in a small place, you get a chance to try your hand at pretty much everything.
right.
But also, I decided to switch my major to journalism because of that, because I was working as a reporter, and that's
Mhm.
where I took my first media law courses. And at one point, one of my coworkers said, I know you have planned to go to law school at some point. Um, did you know there's such a thing as a communications lawyer? And so I thought, huh, well, that's a thought.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so as I continued learning more about the field, by the time I got to law school, I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do First Amendment and communications law.
right. Wow. And that's I mean, it's early in your career to decide that that would be a specialty because it's a
Well, yeah, but it's one of those things where it wasn't really that much of an established discipline. There were a few people like the great Floyd Abrams who,
Mhm.
if someone said, name a communication or a First Amendment lawyer, that's the person they would name. Floyd had been a lawyer working on the Pentagon Papers case, for example,
Okay.
and has been one of the leading figures in this field. And so, but it's not like you could count on your hand that many more. Although now it's really a robust area of the law. There's a lot to do.
Well, yeah.
But when I was in school, if I told my professors or a prospective employer that I wanted to do First Amendment law, the main reaction I would get would be, "Oh, that's nice, Sonny. Nobody's going to make
Right.
a living at
No one's
that,
gonna make a
but
living at that.
go ahead.
Right. Right. Sure.
You do what you want to do." And
Right.
so I just kept plugging away at it until finally things worked out,
Mhm.
which
Yeah,
is
clearly.
a good thing because I didn't really have a plan B.
Right. No, that's I mean, many times in life I've found that that's a good thing. I mean, all the musicians that I know that are very good didn't have a backup plan. And all the musicians that I know that are average that are doing something else
Yeah.
had that backup plan, you know what I mean? It's like, they play the guitar in their band, but then again, their Uncle Joe has a grocery store and he needs a manager, so he's just gonna take that gig. But if you really are like me and have no skills at anything whatsoever other than playing the piano,
Yeah, if this hadn't worked out, I don't know what I'd be doing.
and, y but, it's really, you know, the same way that I mean, I'm couching everything in musicians' terms, but it's the same way that someone finds a style of musical instrument and music they wanna do, and if you just plug away at it long enough, you'll get recognition if you're good. So, the fact that you chose that was just a hobby for other lawyers that were busy doing personal injury cases, to pay their bills, you actually made that ideal happen for you and turn it into a living, which is really good.
Well, it's one of the things that's kept me interested in this field for over 40 years
Right.
because the stories that come from free speech cases, First Amendment cases, to me are always fascinating. And the other thing about it too is one of the reasons why I sort of naturally gravitated toward the law of free expression is because I hate bullies. There's no bigger bully in the world than to say that you're going to let the government decide what you should think, how you can say it, how you express yourself.
Right. It's wonderful, that I mean, obviously, you're a superstar in that field, and you've had some incredibly high visibility cases, and, I don't know if you wanna to talk about any of that stuff or not, but I'm certainly not gonna force you to, but, being a music, centered podcast, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the whole Janet Jackson, situation. Um but, so, I mean, do you wanna talk about any of that stuff at all? I mean, we w
Sure, sure.
alright.
And also, I could talk about some of the cases that I wrote about in my book.
Good, yes, we wanna pimp your book too. I mean, we
Yeah,
want
yeah,
everyone to buy it. Um,
absolutely. Well, as
um
long as we're pimping my book, I'll
yeah,
show the
yeah, do
cover.
it. This is great. Oh, this is like
The
a real
Mind of the
show
Censor and
now.
the Eye of the Beholder.
Wow.
the First Amendment and the censor's dilemma. But I have a chapter on music censorship in the
Huh?
book because it has always been a part of the censorship of youth culture and of anything that's considered to be threatening. You'll find many moral panics along the way. And the Super Bowl wardrobe malfunction arose not because of the music, but still, I think it fits kind of in that
Right.
same mold. But
Well,
again,
it does. And also, I mean, if you go back to the 1920s,
yeah,
pre-prohibition, the jazz age, quote unquote, the outrage was insane.
it absolutely was one of the early moral panics. There was a bill introduced in Washington state, for example, in I think 1933, that they were going to commit anyone who was found to be jazzily intoxicated. And if there was a ruling that that was the case, they could be confined to the state mental institution.
Wow.
It was just insane. But the kind of reaction you got pushing back against jazz, you see that profiled in The Music Man, for
Mhm.
example, right?
Right.
Where you see the song "You Got Trouble" is all about the evils of a pool hall, right? But in the course of that song, there's all this line about, and there's jazz music.
Yeah, yeah.
Grab your sons, your daughters.
And of course, the Tipper Gore situation with
Yes,
you were around for that stuff. Were you involved
well, I
in
was. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I watched that hearing. This was in September 1985. That the Senate Commerce Committee held a hearing on whether or not uh, record albums should have stickers for explicit lyrics.
Mhm.
And it was called, at the time, the label that was being used for this moral panic was porn rock. And it
Wow.
was
I'd buy
uh,
that.
leading wives of politicians, Tipper
Mhm.
Gore among them,
Right.
Susan Baker, who was married to then the White House
James
Chief of
Baker.
Staff. Matter of fact, Parents Music Resource Center, PMRC, was formed in 1985 by the wives of politicians. At its height, it had no more than 22 members. The LA Times said that half of the PMRC members were married to 10% of the Senate. And so that's the reason why you had hearings in September 1985 about the evils of porn rock,
Mhm.
whereas the PTA, which had at the time some 5.6 million members and had been trying to lobby on the same issue, had
Right.
gotten nowhere. But you get a
Wow.
few connected political
Sure.
wives together, then suddenly you have hearings about what to do about it. And they were putting serious pressure on the Recording Industry Association
Mhm.
to adopt this labeling requirement. And they made the bad judgment of having to testify at this hearing in September of 85. Dee Snider from Twisted Sister,
Right. Zappa.
John Denver, and, geez,
Didn't Frank Zappa didn't
Zappa.
appear?
Exactly,
Yeah,
yeah, Zappa
yeah.
was the 3rd, and Zappa was the best because he basically described the record labeling proposal as a recipe for censorship whipped up like an instant pudding by the wives of Big Brother. The greatest line. He was not a hit with the Senators,
Sure.
and, so
Frank was a
and
man who didn't suffer fools.
yeah, and the outcome of the whole thing was, yeah, they got the industry, they were able to pressure the industry into doing these record labels, and the labels became a great marketing item. I mean, it was
Exactly.
the way in which so many people sold albums because if they got a label on it, you knew kids were gonna wanna get the album.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, I know for a fact that, I was working at, Record Town at Copley Place in Boston in I think it was around then, maybe 86, 87, right around then, and every time a record would come in with a label on it, we'd proudly display it right at the end on the end caps.
Yeah,
Didn't matter who it was. It just
yeah.
we knew it was gonna be good.
There was even a George Carlin album where you have the whole front of the album was the record label with Carlin just peering over the edge of it.
That's right, I
This is
remember
great.
that.
And don't forget the Louie Louie Fiesta in the 1960s. Everyone knows the song Louie
Right.
Louie.
Sure.
Legendary ever since then, but also certainly brought to a new generation by Animal House with
Animal
featuring
House, yep,
Louie
yeah.
Louie, and you see it all over in the culture. But it wasn't like the Kingsmen who recorded the best known version of Louie Louie. It's not like they were the only ones that recorded it. Paul Revere and the Raiders had a version of it, uh, written by Richard Berry. Just I want to give
Okay.
credit where credit is due. But the Kingsman is the version that really took off in the early 1960s, 62, 63, around then. But because the lyrics were pretty much unintelligible, and I can get more into that. Um, People started making up their own versions of the lyrics where they imagined they were hearing dirty words in it.
Mhm.
And so that rumor got to the FBI and got to the Justice Department. It was actually Robert Kennedy, when he was Attorney General, was written, someone wrote him a scare letter about this filthy song that is being played on the radio. And so he had J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI look into it. There was a nationwide investigation that involved 6 FBI field offices to see if somehow, somewhere, you could detect dirty words in
Huh?
Louie Louie. And what's weird about it is that this investigation went on for like, oh God, a year, year and a half, until someone said, you know what? People file their lyrics in the Copyright Office. And,
Right.
why don't we just go check to see what the lyrics are? And so someone did. And the FBI had this weird internal report that says, yes, there's really nothing untoward in these lyrics,
Right.
but maybe we better keep this investigation going for a little while. So and it went
Well,
on for another year, year and a half until finally it got closed down. But it had really started out as just this sort of schoolyard rumor that then
right.
got out of control.
Oh,
The really weird part of this story, if this isn't weird enough, is that um, the recording does include the word fuck. And actually, if you go back and listen for it, you might be able to hear it. But Louie Louie was recorded in a single take in a really makeshift recording studio that had just a single mic suspended from the
right.
ceiling. Jack Ely, the lead singer, had just gotten braces like the week before. And that's one of the reasons why he kind of
It's
slurs his
unintelligible.
words.
Right.
And he's also standing on his tippy toes trying to sing up into the mic. And so that's one of the reasons why it sounds the way it does. But about 57 seconds in, the drummer dropped a stick and said, "Fuck." And it's in the recording. If you listen for it and you know it's there, you can
Right.
make it out. But through all of this, no one ever detected that that was in there.
That's funny. Wow, all the listening and the investigation. I love that they get the printed lyrics, but they still keep the investigation going.
Yeah,
That's the government.
yeah.
Wow, we got a few more
Your
free
tax
lunches
dollars
to
at
get out
work.
of this. Yeah. Um, but well, so talk a little bit about the wardrobe malfunction case because that dragged on for quite a while,
We
didn't it?
did. It went on for, oh God, 8 years.
Like,
And so longer than the Louie Louie investigation.
mhm.
No, I remember, and for anyone who was around and watched the Super Bowl in 2004, the they will remember that what became known as the wardrobe malfunction, where at the end of the song, where Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson are singing "Rock Your Body,"
Right.
at the end of the halftime show, he reached over and pulled off the outer portion of her bustier, revealing
Mhm.
for 9/16ths of a second her, I'm trying to remember if it was right breast or left breast. I always get it wrong. But
Okay.
anyway, it also had a star-shaped piercing around her,
Right,
around the nipple.
right.
But anyway, it caused pandemonium at the FCC. And even though nobody really saw what was going on, because it was, like I say, 9/16ths of a second right at the end of the show. It was a long shot from the stage.
Mhm.
And then the lights go out. And so everyone's going, what was that?
Right.
And so it was the most TiVoed moment in history up to that point,
Right, right. I
because everyone's trying
remember
to figure out
watching it.
what had happened. But the problem was that the Drudge Report reported the next morning that this had been an intentional part of the performance that CBS
Correct.
had planned and knew about. And so within less than 24 hours, or let me put it this way, less time than it took Congress to declare war on Japan after Pearl Harbor. The FCC came out with an investigation and they sent CBS a detailed and extensive list of things they had to produce within a week. All the documentation for the show, everything. How could this have possibly happened on American TV?
Uh-huh.
I was hired by CBS
Mhm.
to conduct the internal investigation and to defend the FCC's demand for documents, then ultimately issuing a fine. I won't bore you with all the details.
No, but some. I like this is good.
I interviewed everyone who had been involved in the show, although we did not get to Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake. We talked to the representatives and got information from them. But all of the planning, really interesting side part of that is that at the time they'd been making one of those making of documentaries, the making of the
Mhm.
halftime show. And so everything was documented, everything was there. And we had, including all of the shooting scripts and everything else, we had video from inside the control room during the halftime show. And for the claim that this was something planned, all of the people who were sitting there at the boards, they see this happen. They go, "What the hell? What was
Right,
that?"
right. No, yeah.
And so, it was clear that this was not an intentional thing. From what I understand, based on discussing this with everyone, is that Janet Jackson and her choreographer had come up with an idea for a new ending for the
Mhm.
bit. They called Timberlake into her trailer like an hour before the show and said, "Justin, look at we'll do it this way."
Yeah, yeah.
And, the thing is, I think what was supposed to happen was that he was supposed to pull off this outer part of this sort of kabuki costume
Right.
she was wearing, and that would reveal, like, a red lacy covering for her breast rather than have the whole thing come off. I think that's one of the reasons why Justin Timberlake came up with the label, wardrobe malfunction,
Huh?
because this is what was supposed to have happened, right?
Right.
But this is why you rehearse live TV,
Right.
right?
Right.
I
Yeah.
looked at the dress rehearsals and the videos from all of those. None of this was in the script. None of it was supposed to happen. So this was
Mhm.
really an impromptu thing that the performers came up with.
Mhm.
And because in the midst of a performance, everybody's adrenaline is up and everything like that, it didn't happen as they originally planned.
No, rehearsal is key. Yeah, especially for a live television show, you don't wanna wing
Exactly.
it. Maybe in the dressing room, he should have tried ripping it off once to make sure that it came out, you know
Just to see how it might work. Yeah,
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
that's what
But
I understand happened, but the
okay.
FCC was under a lot of pressure from Congress. This was at the same time when Bono had, or I think it was NBC, for the Video Music Awards, Bono had said, "This is fucking brilliant,"
Jesus. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and oh, I'm sorry, no, it was the Golden Globes where Bono had said, "This is really fucking brilliant." And that had started Congress beginning to look at the FCC and whether or not it was enforcing its indecency rules. And then in the midst of that, when that was beginning to cause uh, um, a lot of outrage, then in the middle of that, the wardrobe malfunction happens.
Mhm, mhm.
So what had started 2004 as a hot political issue for people looking at the FCC and broadcasting and all of that, that issue then went nuclear when this happened on the Super Bowl. So pressure coming from Congress on the FCC for them to do something was really intense. And so it was clear that somebody was getting fined.
Right, right.
They didn't really much care who. And so even though we were able to show all of the evidence to the FCC, that none of this was intentional. And the FCC's rules said if it is fleeting, inadvertent, that kind of thing, that it's not a violation of the rules. So they had to kind of change the rules midstream and then fine CBS anyway. But the long story, or to cut the long story a little shorter, uh, at the end of that process, 8 years later, we got the FCC, or forced the FCC to write CBS a check to pay them back for the $550,000 fine they had imposed for the Super Bowl.
Ah. Well, and at that and it with $550,000, they could buy a 10-second commercial in a new Super Bowl.
Exactly. Exactly.
But, well, Well, I remember watching it, because I was trying to come off of, I don't know what I forget what it was. The Super Bowl is always, to me, horrific because I had to watch the Buffalo Bills lose 4 in a row back in the '90s, and, I was a huge, being from Buffalo, a huge Bills fan, and and I thought, they gotta win one of these things, and they didn't. So it's always a little PTSD for me, but we would have a Super Bowl party at my house every year, and everyone was over, and I was half paying attention, and our friend Carl said, I think her boobie just came out." And and I said, "What?" And by then it was over, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
But,
It was clearly a
but
blink and you miss it moment.
yeah, I mean, 9/16ths of a second is not a lot of time to see a tit. Um, but then, but I wonder, this is just, again, an idiot piano player asking dumb questions, but you gotta say, 8 years. How much
Yeah.
did it cost in legal fees and everything? You know what I mean? To keep something going for that amount of time.
Let's just say I was able to put my kids through college.
There you go. Wow. Oh, I wasn't even I was alluding to you. I was alluding to the whole
Well,
process,
no, I
both
understand. No,
sides. But, oh, well, that's good. That's great then. But so the other thing that I wanted to ask you about before I forget, because there's still many other things that I want to touch on, but we have to talk a little bit about the Lenny Bruce work that you did because that's like heroic. I mean, the fact that tell me about how did you get the idea of this yourself, or was this talk around for years, or how did all that come about?
no, it came about through, a couple of friends of mine who wrote a book, a terrific book called The Trials of Lenny Bruce,
Uh-huh.
and, that's what led to the pardon effort. Before I go on, let me just say it very sad that Lenny's daughter, Kitty Bruce,
Mhm.
died just last week. Her obituary
Oh,
appeared in the New York
I
Times.
oh,
Kitty
I
and I
didn't
had
know that.
gotten to know each other because of the pardon effort and, became friends and would exchange Christmas cards every year, and she was really a terrific woman, and it's really a terrible thing that
Yeah,
she's gone.
that's awful.
But it was in my life and career, a highlight that I got to work on this project to bring at least a sense of posthumous justice to
Right.
Lenny Bruce. For those of your listening audience who don't know, Lenny, of course, the legendary comic from the 50s and 60s that broke many barriers, but also one of the barriers that he ran up against was the law
Mhm,
because he was talking about real things in life, but also taking on real issues, religion, politics, sex, all of those, and doing it in an unvarnished way. And because of
mhm,
that, he was prosecuted for obscenity. In It seems hard to imagine now, but in some of the bluest cities in the bluest states in
right.
America, he was prosecuted in San Francisco, he was prosecuted in Los Angeles, Chicago, and eventually in New York. And he was convicted in 1963 or 64, either one, for doing a bit at a Greenwich Village nightclub called Cafe A Go Go,
Right.
and New York went all out to prosecute him for obscenity for a bit in a late night, adults only nightclub
Mhm,
for a routine that wouldn't even raise an eyebrow on HBO today or anywhere else for that matter. Um, People now, more young people now are aware of Lenny Bruce through shows like The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
mhm,
My good friend Ronnie Marmo has a one-act show called I'm Not a Comedian, I'm Lenny Bruce, which I
right.
highly recommend to anyone who has a chance to see that.
Okay.
But my friends Ron Collins and David Scover had this terrific book talking about all of these trials around the country.
Mhm,
And they had discovered in the course of researching this book that the New York conviction was still on the books. It had been incorrectly reported by the New York Times in the early 70s, I guess, that that conviction had been overturned on appeal. But in fact, it was the club owner, Howard Solomon, whose conviction had been overturned. Lenny, because he died of a morphine overdose in like 1964, his conviction was still on the books. He never had a chance to complete or perfect his,
Right, right.
and also he escaped the state rather than doing
Well,
time. But that's a whole
sure.
nother issue. But nonetheless, there was still this offense of someone being prosecuted in America for word crimes that
Right.
people paid money to go see in a nightclub. And so it really is a stain. It sort of is contrary to everything we think of as a culture of free expression. And
Right.
so my friends actually, I got sort of sucked into this because they had come up with a plan for finding a way to enlist me to do this posthumous pardon
Mhm.
gig. I'd been looking at manuscripts of their book as they were writing it. And one day, Ron Collins asked me to lunch, and we're sitting there over lunch, and he goes, "You know, we've discovered that this conviction is still on the books. That it was incorrectly reported. Do you know if there's such a thing as a posthumous pardon?" And so well, I don't know. I went back to the office after lunch and
Mhm.
did about a half hour maybe of research. And I called him and I said, "Well, yes, there is such a thing as posthumous pardons. It's been done once by the federal government. About half a dozen states have done them over the years. New York never has." And so he said, "Well, what do you think of giving it a shot for New York?" And so I thought about it. It was one of those let's put on a show in the barn kind of
Right,
moment.
right, right.
And so I agreed to sign up for it and put together this pardon petition. In the meantime, I switched to a different law firm, and they also agreed to take this on as a pro bono project. And so we petitioned then Governor Pataki of New York, who, and I'm trying to think, actually, it was right around the time as the wardrobe malfunction
Oh,
when
okay.
that happened.
Was it 2004,
Yeah,
2005?
yeah. And so Governor Pataki granted the first posthumous pardon in New York history to Lenny Bruce.
Wow, that's great. And I mean, yeah, all of the things that you said about Lenny, but also really the the template for modern stand-up comedy.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
no one before him, did that style of comedy. I mean, it was joke tellers, it was
But,
Catskill
yeah,
guys,
it
it
was
was,
Borscht
you
Belt,
know yeah, Borscht Belt,
jokes
um,
and impressions
and
and stuff like
yeah,
that.
Joey Lewis and,
Absolutely.
and this guy comes out talking about, current events and as you say, with opinions on politics and sex and religion and that was all taboo.
And
And
revealing hypocrisies and
right. I mean, and certainly we all know George Carlin, direct descendant,
well
but
that and actually Carlin and Lenny Bruce knew each other,
right.
and Lenny had helped get Carlin started and had offered
Mhm.
him some advice and so on. But
Wow.
what's really fascinating, and I had not realized this until a couple of years ago, is I had known that Carlin had been arrested at the same time as Lenny Bruce in Chicago.
Right.
Lenny had been performing at the Gate of Horn.
Mhm.
He'd been warned, but anyway, did the bits anyway. Gets
Right.
arrested, and then the cops go through the Gate of Horn, asking people to show IDs.
Mhm.
And so this young man says, "I don't believe in IDs." And so they
Right.
say, "Well, you're coming with us," and throw him in the paddy wagon with Lenny. And
Right.
Lenny looks at him and says, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I didn't show him my ID." Lenny just says, "You schmuck." So that was Lenny and George Carlin in the paddy wagon together in Chicago. But the
Right.
weird part, and this is the part that I did not know, if you look at there's a classic photo of Lenny being let out from the club in the
Mhm.
Gate of Horn, and I think he may even be in handcuffs. I'm not sure, but if you look over his shoulder, you see a young George Carlin
Wow.
being following him along to the paddy wagon.
Well, being in sort of ancillary show business that I'm in,
That's
you
yeah,
know
you're in
well,
the
I mean,
heart of show business, man.
I'm in the heart of show business, but ancillary to comedy, you know,
Yes,
having been around Penn and Teller for 25 years now and have met, every important comedian in the world, especially through early days of when I was first with him, he was shooting The Aristocrats, and I got
yeah,
to meet so many huge, huge guys that I again, I'm not a funny guy. You know what I mean? I don't pretend to be a comedian or anything like that. But I grew up worshiping them and loving it. Was smart enough to know that I don't have the chops for that. But to be sitting in a room with Eric Idle and Steve Martin, you know,
Yeah.
and just hearing the way their minds work, and being around Penn for 25 years, the idea that there's that virtuosity of thought,
Yes.
when they're making a joke, they've already got 3 they've disregarded before
Well,
they make the joke.
look, I think that that's the sort of the common denominator between comedy and jazz, right?
Mhm.
And that's what Penn was talking about in The Aristocrats, right?
Right. Well, that was the whole thought
Yeah.
behind the movie was, of improvising over the same changes, which a
Yes.
jazz musician does. But I grew to, I knew who Lenny Bruce was because of, I knew that the Dustin Hoffman movie was, you know, based on Lenny's life,
Yes.
but I didn't know any more about him other than that he was important. And then, but over the years became this fanatic, how much of a towering figure he was. And it was
Yeah.
only a short
Absolutely.
time. It
Yeah.
wasn't
Very
a
short
long
time.
run, he changed everything.
And tremendous influence. You're right. He absolutely changed everything. And I had only known of who Lenny was when I was a kid because I had older brothers who were 10 and 11 years older than me. And so it was enough to give me a connection to the culture of what was going on for people that age at that time. But it was one of those things where if the name came up around the house, my mom would say, "Shh, don't talk about that.
Yeah, yeah.
He's,
That's filthy.
he's someone you shouldn't know about."
He's
But
dirty.
I didn't know anything more about Lenny until the Dustin Hoffman movie, Lenny, came out, and which was right when I was in college. It was really a prime time for my
Right,
coming of age
right.
to learn about that. But when I learned the most about it was when I read Ron and David's book, and that's where I got the full explanation of the interconnection between Lenny comedy and the law, and
Mhm.
that was just fascinating to me.
And I'm assuming that Pataki at the time saw the error of and it wasn't a hard sell.
Well, it would be interesting to know what was going on through his mind at the
Mhm.
time because, he didn't have to grant the posthumous pardon. I mean, it was totally in his discretion to do it or not do it. It was at a time in the country when there was this moral panic about broadcast indecency, and he's a Republican governor of a state. Uh, you could easily see a politician calculating that he had nothing to gain by doing this act, but for whatever reason, he was persuaded that it would be a
Yeah.
good thing to do. I
Well,
remember
I would assume it was your argument that persuaded him.
well, I
You
hope
seem to be
so,
good at that. Yeah.
but we had no idea. I mean, it was sort of like putting a note in a bottle and putting it in the ocean. Maybe
Yeah, yeah.
someone will come across it, maybe they won't. We had kind of I had tried to stay in touch with some of the governor's assistants to see if
Mhm.
there was any progress on the pardon, and they were cordial enough to stay in touch and let me know that they would let us know. But I didn't hear anything more until, like, just a few days before Christmas in, 2003. I had knocked off work for the holidays. I was
Mhm.
on my way driving to a sports authority to pick up a ping pong table that we were gonna give our kids that year,
Very nice.
and get a call as I'm on the road. So I pull over. This was when the cell phones were these big, bulky, look like
Right. Sure.
walkie-talkie kinds of things. So I pull out my phone, and it's a call from the governor's assistant, and she says, "I want to give you a few moments head start. You're going to start getting calls from the press because Governor Pataki just signed the pardon." It
Nice.
was like,
Very
this was
nice.
great. So there I was, like 10 minutes later, I was in the parking lot of a sports authority trying to juggle this ping pong table that we're trying to get into my car somehow, uh, and fielding calls from the press.
Right. Oh, that's great. Well, and a fine Christmas gift.
That's the first time they met Kitty, because I had through Ron and David, we'd gotten Kitty and Hot Honey Harlow, Lenny's widow, to send
Mhm.
letters of support, but I had not met her in any of those communications. But she called me to thank me for the work
Right.
that we did on the pardon, and then said, "I'm getting calls from reporters asking me about you, and what should I tell them about you?" And I said, "Well, tell them I represent living people too."
That's good. And on that, I have a little problem with my HOA. No, I'm kid um, I've been waiting the whole show to spring that on you. Well, what are you working on now? I wanna ask before we run out of time.
Well, a variety of things. You know, your listeners may not. I work for an organization called FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving both the law of free speech and a culture of free expression. And I do quite a lot of litigation, and it can be across the board. We now have a case against the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, for trying to lean on companies that rate news on whether or not they are reliable or trustworthy, and so on.
That's
And
interesting. Yeah.
so we're trying to establish that. But probably of more interest is we're defending the pollster and Selzer, who for 40 years was responsible for the Iowa poll in the Des Moines Register.
Right.
Because the Iowa poll right before this last presidential election said that Kamala Harris was leading in Iowa, something that turned out to not be borne out by the election.
Mhm.
President Trump sued the Des Moines Register and sued Ann Selzer for consumer fraud
God.
because of the poll results, because the poll did not accurately reflect the outcome of the election. So
Wow.
we're defending in that case. And there are actually a couple of cases going on. There's the Trump case and then a copycat case that's been brought. So
Mhm.
we are defending those
Right.
cases.
Okay. Well, I I steer away from anything having to do with the political stuff in this show, but, I certainly hope, you prevail in that because, it's all getting eaten away one little bit and what
Well,
I love.
and that's, I applaud you for staying away from the political stuff because I think that pretty much everything politics touches, it diminishes or destroys. And so that's one of the reasons, actually, that's one of the things that made me a First Amendment lawyer. I don't care which end of the political spectrum it comes
Right.
from. If you're trying to use government power to restrict speech, I don't care whose speech it is. It can come from the left, it can come from the right. It just doesn't matter. What matters is the sanctity of the human mind and the ability to speak your piece.
Well, that's, incredibly, well said, and I couldn't agree more. And, as I said many times to people that, bring up any argument against free speech, I say, "I don't want anyone telling me I can't play a D minor 7th chord." You know what I mean?
Well, bringing it back to Lenny Bruce, what he said is, if you take away the right to say fuck, you take away the right to say fuck the government.
That's right, exactly, and that's a wonderful little spot to end on here. Bob, I love you, man, and I'm so happy that you came on to grace us with your presence. You're the most esteemed guest that we've ever had, um, and I anticipate that the ratings will go through the roof. Uh, but
Well,
but
Jonesy, it's always fun to chat with you.
I just wanted to say, Jen, our producer Jen, just came in with a helpful note to say, ask him about his book again. But really, it's been so much fun, and I've known you now over 20 years through
Yeah,
Penn, and,
yeah,
so yes, please, tell us hold up your book one more time and tell us
sure, happy to.
where to get it. I'm gonna read it.
It is The Mind of the Censor and the Eye of the Beholder, the First Amendment and the Censor's Dilemma. It's available at Amazon or anywhere you can order books. And I hope for if anyone takes us up on that, that they enjoy it.
Well, I'm sure they will because, again, you're not only a gifted orator, you're an incredible, well, I mean, you've been crafting these arguments for years, so you know what you're doing. Um, and,
Let's hope.
well, no, yeah, clearly.
Well, still working on it, building the craft.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, people say, without going on and on, I hope I'm a better piano player than I was last year at this time. Well,
Well,
and I hope 10 years from
as
now
long
I'm
as
much
I've
better.
known you for that 20 years, you've always been just amazing. And every time I
Well,
see you, I marvel just how skilled you are.
no,
It's
thanks.
really,
Well,
it's
no, but it's something you never. I don't know one musician in my entire life that said, "Well, I got this down."
yeah,
You know what I mean? If you do, there's something wrong with them
exactly.
because you're always striving. to keep going and get better. And um, well, again, I can't thank you enough. It's been a real pleasure and an honor. And I hope we